Welcome back to the next episode of The Umbrella Girls. And don't forget, if you haven't already, to hit the follow button on our podcast. And as you know, we're on Spotify, we're on Amazon. So do hit that follow button to make sure every week you find out what's happening next with the Umbrella Girls, Jojo, Kay, Sam, and Anna. Also, next week, we're going to be telling you how you can join the Umbrella Girls gang and what you will need to do. So let's get on now with Chapter 6 and continue with an exciting story of the Umbrella Girls and the three people. Chapter 6. The tall 7-foot figure who had been spying earlier on the girls slowly whispered into Her Royal Highness's ear, giving her full report of all that he had seen. He whispered and detailed how the 4 new girls had arrived, and as he did so, Her Royal Highness's smile grew and grew bigger. When his report was finished, he stood back from Her Royal Highness and waited for her to give him his new orders. He liked the power that he had as the head watcher. He knew that all the people in front of him were in awe of how close he could get to Her Royal Highness and how he was one of the very few to have her ear. This has been his family's role for generations and would be for generations to come. To have Her Royal Highness's ear, he knew was only one step away from being a member of the royal family. But he also knew, as head watcher, he would never be part of that family. So he had to be very careful on how he used the power that he had inherited from his father, and his father from his grandfather. Her Royal Highness smiled as she looked out at her people in front of her. She had fought a hard battle to be elected to this position, and now it was in her grasp that her side of the family and her firstborn would automatically be the rulers of this land forever in the future. She turned around and picked up the old journal off the table beside her. The journal was never, ever out of her reach or out of her sight. Her mother had given it to her on her deathbed, and she had warned her to protect the journal at all costs. Her mother had explained to her, as her grandmother has explained to her mother, and generations before that someday the journal would reveal its secrets and how the journal could be used for great power. Even though she was only a child when her mother died, she knew the importance of what she had been told by her mother. Since she was a child, the letter journal had been full of empty pages. Well, except for the one time many years ago when a small drawing of a man had appeared on the first page. But since then, nothing. But in the last few days, a new drawing had appeared, and this time it showed 4 girls heading down a path. Her Royal Highness called her head watcher nearer and whispered her instructions to him. When she was finished, he stood up, bowed, and he left the room. She turned round and smiled again at the audience. Little did they know how very soon the world and their lives would change forever. The girls knew they were getting closer to the fire because the smell was growing stronger. Kay was leading the way, followed by Sam, Anna, and Jojo. Every once in a while, Anna would look back from where they'd come from, trying to make sure she didn't forget the way back. Kay, on the other hand, was very focused on only reaching the source of the smoke. She really believed that if she found the source, she could find a way home. Of all the girls, Sam was the only one not thinking of getting home, but more about the adventure and the mystery of where they all were now. The walk had taken the girls much longer than they had expected, and with the sun high in the sky, all of them were thirsty and getting hungry. Up to now, the path had gone through fields of medium-high grass, but the girls were very surprised with the lack of any flowers in the field, or even the lack of birds in the sky. Jojo said the place reminded her of a picture that someone had started, but they hadn't finished yet. They hadn't added in any details. To make the time go quicker, and to stop them all thinking and worrying about where they were now, the girls all chatted about everything, from all the sports they played to Anna's desire to never miss a day in school. A desire that none of the girls could relate to. But Anna had explained that next to getting A's, never missing a day was a worthy goal. But Kay said her idea of heaven was having a snow day every day. But after a while, they talked less as they grew tired. But at last, they seemed to about to reach their destination. Suddenly, Kay held up her hand for all of them to stop. "Look, the smoke seems to come from behind that wall," she whispered as she pointed to an old brick wall that was about 5 feet high, with grass growing out from all the gaps in it. "Can you see anyone?" Sam asked as she stood on her toes, expecting the extra few inches in height to allow her to see over the wall, which it didn't. "No, let's get closer," Kay answered as she moved on without waiting for her friends to answer or follow her. The 4 girls stood with their backs to the wall, each wondering what to do next. "Well," Sam asked Kay in a low voice, "have a look." Kay gave Sam a look that said, "Shut up," as she slowly moved towards a gap in the wall that once housed a window. She took a deep breath, as if she was going to dive into deep water, and slowly poked her head round the entrance to the gap in the wall, and then moved it back really quickly. "I can see the fire," she whispered, a bit out of breath, as if she just ran 5 miles in a race. "Was that it?" Sam asked as she pushed past Jojo and Anna to have a look for herself. Sam slowly looked round the gap, but unlike Kay, she seemed to take longer looking at the fire and the space all around it. It seemed to be too long to Kay, and she pulled Sam back. "What?" Sam asked, looking annoyed. "Somebody might see you," Kay whispered. And then a man's voice came back in reply. "I've already seen you lot," came the reply from behind the wall. All the girls froze in shock, and nobody moved a muscle. They all looked at each other, and all their eyes carried the same message. "Help! Are you 4 going to stay behind that wall forever?" came the deep male voice again. Sam was the first to be brave enough to move away from the comfort of the wall and step through the gap. As she stood there, Sam could still not see who had called out to them. She looked back at her friends and shrugged her shoulders. Jojo, Kay, and Anna slowly moved away from the wall to join Sam, and the 4 of them stood looking round at what was once a small room. But now, over the years, nature and the elements had beaten the walls down, and grass grew from all the gaps. The small fire was in the centre of the room, and because of the lack of any wind, the smoke went up high into the sky in a straight line. A line so straight it could be mistaken that it was been drawn by a ruler and a pencil. "Where are you?" Jojo asked as she summoned up the courage to speak. But for a moment, no one answered her, and she was just about to ask the same question again, only this time louder, when a voice made the four of them jump in surprise. "I'm over here," answered the voice that belonged to a man with grey hair and a smile that seemed to fill his whole face. He seemed to just appear near the fire, and he was carrying what seemed like a really old battered teapot. "So, girls, do you have names?" the old man asked as he hung the old battered pot above the fire on a hook that was on a stick. Jojo looked at the old clothes the man was wearing. They didn't have any holes in them, but were well worn and seemed like they were from a different time. It was obvious that at one time they may have fitted him very well, but now they sort of hung on him as if he was too skinny for them. But the huge smile on his face seemed to hide everything else that was wrong with him. That and the grey and black speckled beard that covered his face. But it was his eyes that shone. Every time he smiled, they shone like two big flashing lights. "I'm Jojo, and this is Kay, Anna, and Sam," Jojo announced as she pointed to each of her friends and delivered their names. "And who are you?" she asked as she moved a little bit closer to the fire. The old man stopped what he was doing and looked up, and it was as if he was seeing Jojo for the first time. He seemed to lose his breath for a moment. Jojo noticed that the smile seemed to fade for a moment from his eyes, as if he had seen a sad scene in a movie. As she looked back into the girls, only Anna seemed to have noticed the same thing. Their eyes locked, and they both wondered the same thing. What's going on here? But by the time Jojo looked back at the old man, his eyes were smiling brightly again. "They've given me a few names around here, from the Wanderer to the Old One, but the name I like to be called by is Doran," he said as he poked the fire to make the flame even bigger. "As a matter of interest, where are we, and how did we get here?" Kay asked as she moved closer to the fire and to Jojo. And Anna asked more importantly, "How do we get home?" Doran looked at the four girls and could see from their faces that they all had questions to ask. He felt jealous that they had age on their side, where his youth was already gone by the time he had arrived here, and he had to learn the hard way how to survive, and he had to learn the hard way that the way back was blocked. But he knew now was not the time to give the girls that piece of information. "Before I explain where you are, you need to have some of this tea so you can better understand what I am about to tell you," Doran said as he produced 4 tin cups from a cloth bag lying by the fire. "Why do we need tea first?" Sam asked as she watched Doran pour the liquid into each cup. "Because to understand where you are, you need to be able to see it," Doran said with a big grin as he gave Sam the first cup. "I think my eyesight is fine as it is without having to drink any tea," Sam said as she looked into the cup and the steaming liquid. "It looks like green tea," Sam asked, half as a question and half as a statement. "How can it be green tea? It looks like lemon tea and smells like lemon tea," Anna said as she smelled her cup. "What? Are you all colourblind?" Kay said to others. "It's berry tea," as she looked into her cup and showed the others. No, it's peppermint tea, my favourite, Jojo said as she sniffed the aroma coming out of the cup. She looked at the old man, who was just looking at them smiling. How can we all have different tea when it was all poured from the same pot? All flavours come from nature, and sometimes nature gives you what you like, Doran said as he poured himself some tea. Ah, mango tea, he said as he took a sip. The girls looked at each other, and they all seemed to agree at the same time that drinking the tea was okay, and each of them in turn slowly took a sip. It took a few moments for the tea to make its way into their senses and hit the right places. Each of the girls felt a bit different for a brief few seconds, but it was so brief that they had no real time to react. For the first time, Doran laughed out loud, and he was happy at the experience the girls were having. He could see by their eyes that the tea had worked, and he was jealous that they were having an experience that he had once, many years ago. The girls all started to rub their eyes and blinked for a moment as the bright light blinded them. As quick as it had begun, the light was gone, and before them stood a new place. Jojo looked up at the sky, which was now filled with birds and white clouds. Anna smiled at the butterflies that were flying round the large summer flowers that seemed to just grow and grow in front of her eyes in the fields that they had just come through. Kay just stood there with her mouth open as walls began to grow, and the silence was replaced with the cries and sounds of animals, the type and size that she'd never seen before. The whole area just seemed to come alive. Where there was once only silence, wonderful songs of birds filled the air, and the smell of flowers and scents was all around. What just happened? Jojo shouted at Doran as his laughter got louder and louder. Doran stood up and he waved his arms all around and he announced in a proud voice to the girls, "Welcome to Venita."